Christianity is so out of date. I can't keep all these rules. How can I possibly be right with God?
When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, "You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? We who are not Jews by birth and not sinful Gentiles know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. So we too have put our faith in Christ Jesus, that we may be justified by faith in Christ and not by the works of the law, because by the works of the law no one will be justified. But if, in seeking to be justified by Christ, we Jews find ourselves also among the sinners, doesn't that mean that Christ promotes sin? Absolutely not. If I rebuild what I destroyed, then I really would be a lawbreaker. For through the law I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing."
This is a big passage. Paul starts by rebuking Peter, and then he hits us with some of the most encouraging and challenging words in the New Testament. Verse 11 says that Peter stood condemned. Why? Because he was being a hypocrite. He was being exclusive. He was being two-faced. He was eating with the Gentiles. Eating just means hanging out with, having dinner, being friends, that kind of stuff. He was eating with the Gentiles, but when a group of Jews came, he left the Gentiles and stopped being their friends. He started to neglect the Gentiles and only hang out with Jews. It seems like he wanted the Gentiles to act like Jews. Now, I'm not fully sure what that means, but my assumption is that it has something to do with Jewish food laws. Jewish people could only eat certain things. Paul is less than impressed by this, and he hits Peter with these words saying, "You're a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?" Paul is pointing out Peter's hypocrisy. Peter is a Jew, but he's living like a Gentile, eating whatever he wants and that kind of stuff. But when he separates himself from the Gentiles to eat with Jews, he's taking away the freedom of the Gentiles to live like Gentiles. For the Gentiles to eat with Peter and to hang out with him, they're being forced to follow the Jewish food laws that God has already abolished. Peter has unintentionally put a condition on God's grace. He has added works to the gospel. Paul then articulates what it means to be a Christian by talking about faith and works. Verse 16 says that people aren't justified by the works of the law, but by their faith in Jesus. We're justified, made right, not by keeping a law, not by observing rules, but by putting our faith in Jesus. If it came down to rules, Paul says, no one would be justified. He then asks a rhetorical question. But if while we're trying to be justified in Christ, we associate with sinners, doesn't that mean that Jesus promotes sin? Paul says absolutely not. Verse 19 says, "For through the law I died to the law, that I might live for God." That means that through Jesus perfectly abiding by the law and dying anyway, we might be able to have a relationship with God. He continues in verses 20 and 21, When Christ was crucified, I was crucified with him. I died with him as well. That means that I don't live for myself anymore. I live for Christ. The life we now live, we live in Christ because he gave himself for us. The life we now live, we live by faith in Jesus because he gave himself for us. Paul then puts the last nail in the coffin. He says that if we could be made right by abiding in the law, then Jesus will have died for nothing. If I could get to heaven by being a nice person, then Jesus died for nothing. If I could work my way into a relationship with God, then Jesus died for nothing. If I could be right with God by abiding in the law, then Jesus died for nothing. Jesus' death and resurrection is the only way to God.